Hello everyone, welcome to the YouTube channel of Get Set Law by IMS. I'm your verbal ability mentor Sanjana Ma'am, and let's decode another editorial today. I've already done a couple of these videos previously, so for the ones who are new to this, you may definitely go ahead and watch those videos as well. With that, you will get a lot of articles, a lot of write-ups of different genres, right? So that too would definitely be adding a lot of color to your reading. And that being said, let's take a look at the important insights we can gather from today's decoding, right? So, okay, the most important thing is taking the main idea. The important ideas here refer to the central idea, the central argument. Every time in CLAT, in AILET, and a couple of other examinations, the questions that reign supreme are main idea questions, inference questions. I will also try and tell you, something about the title. And then we'll take a look at a couple of words, which if we have it there, I'll definitely try and tell you the meaning of this. Otherwise, also contextually, if we are able to decode the meaning, that too is going to be very helpful for us, right? And lastly, we will also take a look at the information, because sometimes in a certain passage, the information is repetitive. This time around, I will definitely try and highlight how information is repetitive and how we don't have to read everything word for word. Let's just say, when we have a time constraint, we can definitely choose to skip some information here, right? And maybe we can come back, revisit the passage later if a question based on that information is coming. Okay, having said that, let's take a look at this passage. I know it looks a little lengthy, but it's very easy to understand. So the title is already mentioned here. It says language belongs to a different realm. Let's not focus on the title too much, because to me, it's not, a title that tells us much about what the passage is going to contain, right? So even I believe if we have a title based question and if somebody mentions this title, it still might be a little difficult to decide if this is a correct option or not. Okay, and I'll tell you why. Let's start reading. Okay, so now the first paragraph is not that important, because here the author talks about different inventions and how these inventions have just made our life all the more smoother and easier, right? Except for the bit where the connector, the transition word yet has been used. Always pay focus on yet, on buts, on however, because they will always introduce contrasting fact, which is very crucial to understanding it. Okay, so amid all this change, one aspect of human experience has remained strikingly constant, which hasn't changed much. The very idea of it, the very essence of it hasn't changed much, which is how we communicate. Right. And then in the subsequent paragraph, the author goes on to talk about how we communicate, how it has changed from messengers and handwritten letters to telephones and instant messaging. But the fact that the essence of communicating, the way we communicate, the very intent of it, the originality of it, it still lays intact today. Right? Now, the tools have changed, but the impulse to communicate has not. So can I say, you see, these are two sides of the same coin, these two statements. The essence has not and the impulse to communicate has not. Okay. Now, we are going to talk about the advent of artificial intelligence, which has made communication easy for the most part. But in a way, it's not able to capture the very essence of communicating. Okay, so what the author here is trying to say that artificial intelligence with its advent has rewritten the rules of learning and work, and it is doing a cohort of activities which I don't want to get into, because for the most part it's very familiar to me. I'm assuming this is also going to be familiar to my students also, right? So you don't have to read this much, right? It can act as a tutor, a translator for languages, right? And in subjects that rely on logic, structure and fixed systems, AI has already become transformative. Right? So students can just make use of AI as and when, because they already have it at their disposal. Now, this part is important, and let's just imagine this statement in bold is not given, because this is not how a passage is presented to us in the CLAT and AILET. Now, we have another transition word, however. Language, however, belongs to a different realm. And you might ask, ma'am, don't you think it's the very title here? Yes. So let's just read further. It is not only a system of rules, but also a living, breathing expansion of culture and emotion. So what the author is trying to say here is that language is symbolizing culture and emotion. These are what I mean by keywords, two very important keywords, because AI cannot replicate these two things here. right? AI can help us process grammar, vocabulary, right? It cannot, however, capture harmony, irony, affection, or hesitation, right? So just imagine when we're talking about language being symbolic of culture and emotion, we're also trying to say that language captures humor, irony, affection, or hesitation. Very important keywords, but AI cannot. Right? So a sentence translated by a machine may be correct in words, it may be correct in terms of grammar, it may be correct in terms of the grammatical structure, but it is wrong in spirit. A very potent statement here, right? So language is something which is inseparable from emotion, and at the same time machine cannot feel emotions, right? So what you need to do is this part. Again, I feel you don't have to read that much, because again here the author is talking about how technology can do much more than what was previously imagined, but at the same time even today it could not replicate the very essence of language, which is culture and emotion, right? These translations done by technology may still sound sterile. The tone, the rhythm, the subtle warmth. All right. So there are keywords. I have to read them, right? The rhythm, the subtle warmth, the define human speech are easily lost. Okay. Translation can transfer meaning, but not experience. Another very important phrase here. So understanding a language requires more than decoding its words. It demands entering its world. Now, if I have to frame a question on it, and a question of an easy level of difficulty, okay? So let's just say which of the following cannot be inferred from the passage. And the correct option would be, let's just say we have been able to eliminate all the three options because they can be understood in the context of the passage. And I try to add the option that decoding or understanding a language is limited to decoding its words. You understand? This is something which is running contradictory to the idea, because it's quite clearly mentioned. It's more than decoding its words. It's not strictly limited to it. So you see, a very small part of the passage, but I'm able to fashion a question out of it, an inference question based on that. Okay, which is why the author now wants to say that learning a language has always been different from learning a formula, because language learning is not an abstract skill. It is something which we learn through constant interaction. Human interaction is a very important element. It happens in conversations, in discussions, in laughter, in mistakes, right? And then when we read further, the author comes back to the same point, which is AI tools certainly assess. She's trying to give us a counter argument that yes, we cannot discount the fact that AI has been very helpful. So I'll tell you, while discussing the key takeaways, I had mentioned that I would definitely be highlighting some statements here which will be redundant. If you actually take a note, here also we're talking about the utility, the myriad utilities that AI has to offer. And here as well, we are pretty much doing that, except for the fact that we are trying to now differentiate what AI can do versus what language in its originality has to capture. So this part again, you can choose to skip, except from this part, because we are using buts. You see, yet, but, however, is just important for you to keep in mind. They cannot replace the very heart of language learning, which is the emotional effort of trying to be understood by another person. Fluency is not achieved by perfection alone, but empathy. Again, so many keywords. In order to speak a language well, you need to learn how others think and feel. Another statement is languages are ever evolving, right? It can predict usage, but artificial intelligence cannot participate in the living rhythm of speech. True mastery requires being part of that rhythm, listening, adapting, and responding, something that AI has yet not been able to capture. And ultimately, when you want to, go to the conclusion, it just has a couple of different lines here. The greatest risk is not that AI will replace language learning. I can make yet another inference question on artificial intelligence. All of the following in the passage is true about AI, except you see a negative inference question, and then I can go on to, list down the options. But the greatest risk is that it will make people believe they no longer need to learn. So people will not really take learning language that seriously now, because machines will always be at their disposal. And in doing so, people would lose humility and patience that comes from learning another's tongue. Right? Because we learn another way of seeing the world when we're learning a new language. And then the author ultimately ends the passage on this note that AI will continue to, keep on bringing us new benefits with its advent. But the process of learning a language will outlast every technological revolution, something that AI will never be able to replicate, according to the author. Okay. Technology can help us talk across borders, but only effort and empathy can help us truly understand another, right? And this is something no machine will ever be able to automate. I think I just said this statement much before this, right? So I think like good reading is when you are in the rhythm of reading, you can automatically predict the next thing that's going to come in the passage, right? So I'd say this is a lengthy passage. Most of the information here is quite repetitive in nature, but a couple of takeaways we had. Now, what are the kinds of questions I can frame out of such a passage? If a similar passage, let's just say, is asked in a certain mock that you're attempting. So I can frame a title-based question, but definitely I'm not going to give this as a title because it's still too broad. I can frame a title-based question. I can frame a vocabulary-based question because, I have this word here, which is sterile. So I can frame an antonym-based question or, a synonym-based question. Then I can definitely frame, an inference question, a specific detail question, direct question, main idea question, obviously. So many questions I can fashion out of this passage, right? So yes, that was it about today's, editorial understanding. Hope you liked the video. If you have any suggestions for us, please let us know in the comment section. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.